In Myrtle Beach, you always go at your own pace. Lie out on the sand, lie out by the pool, go boogie boarding, go surfing, walk the boardwalk, walk the marsh walk, golf at one of 90 golf courses, mini golf at one of 50 mini golf courses, fish off a pier, fish from a chartered boat, go shopping, get drinks, eat the freshest seafood. The list is exhaustive, but the experience isn't. You can go all out or do nothing at all. How you relax is up to you. There is so much to do and explore, whether you're traveling with friends, family, or just yourself. With 60 miles of beach, you're going to find your place. If this sounds like what you need, then this is where you belong.
Twisted Tea and Myrtle Beach wholesaler Better Brands Incorporated. Know our consumers enjoy relaxing days on the water with Twisted Tea's original hard iced tea in hand. It's important to remember drink and boat responsibly. Choose to be or designate a sober skipper before leaving the dock. Do it for your family and your friends, your passengers, and everyone else on board. Twisted Tea salutes all sober skippers who take the pledge. Cheers, and we'll see you on the water.
Realtree has always had a connection to the fishing industry and the outdoor lifestyle. In 2016, Realtree expanded on the traditional business of creating the world's most effective camouflage patterns to create a fishing brand and family of patterns designed to connect the woods to the water and strengthen the bond between the two worlds. We couldn't be more excited to be working with the industry's top brands, retailers, and anglers to continue our growth, and we hope that you will join us. Enjoy Realtree fishing patterns inshore, offshore, on the lake, or at the dock. Learn more about the extensive line Realtree fishing patterns, apparel, gear, and more at Realtree.com. Trilogy Outdoors.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Trilogy Outdoors studio, and we are actually in the Trilogy Outdoors studio this time. You know, our last episode, and I thank you, Stephen, for trusting me with that episode. I know that was tough.
It was a good one.
I know that was tough. It was fun. I tell you what, I got to hang out with some really great guys down there. Learned a lot about crappie fishing.
It's crappie.
I know, I said the same thing. You know, you heard me.
Depends on where you grow up, I guess.
I learned a lot about crappie fishing, and I got to hang out with some really cool people. I learned a lot about social networking, a lot about advertising and things of that nature, and you and I are going to we made a lot of steps this week, of course. I'm sure you saw the bank account, but we made a lot of steps to get to that point, but we're going to
Real fast, before we get off on what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Is crappie and crappie regional in the same way that chicken perlo and chicken bog is regional?
So you know what Barry, my boss on Let's Fish TV, says? He says, east of the Mississippi, it's crappie. West of the Mississippi, it's crappie.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, so I had an interesting conversation with the senator from Anderson recently, and I said, his name's Mike Gambrell, and we call him Mikey. I said, Mikey, what do y'all have at political functions? I said, we have chicken bog, and south of Georgetown proper, they have chicken perlo.
Right.
And west of Georgetown proper, they have chicken perlo. And he said, we have chicken pie. I said, chicken pie?
Chicken what?
Chicken pie? Like chicken pot pie? He said, no, not chicken pot pie, chicken pie. And I said, tell me what it is. He said, sticky rice, blown up chicken, and sausage with some salt and pepper. I said, that's chicken bog. He said, no, that's chicken pie. I've never in my life heard of chicken pie. He said, that's what we call it in Anderson and in surrounding areas of that area of South Carolina. I asked Senator Clymer from Rock Hill area, and he said, some people call it chicken bog around here. Most people call it chicken bog. So it sort of seems like bog comes from Georgetown, curls around in the PD up into the Rock Hill area. You got perlo, which is south of Georgetown into Charleston and west.
Bam.
And then you got chicken pie up in that weird corner of the state where Anderson is. How weird is that?
Guess what's coming to Georgetown?
What's that?
The World Chicken Perlo Championship.
Are they calling it perlo?
Yes, they are.
Best perlo I ever had was Edsel Hemingway's perlo in Andrews.
All right, you're hearing the voice. Of a great friend of mine, somebody that has been a mentor to me for at least a decade. Congressman John Napier, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Senator.
It's an honor.
Good to be here with you in English.
It's truly an honor to have you in here.
Thank you, sir.
It really is. Congressman Napier has got a how do I say this? He's got a storied history in South Carolina, famous or infamous, that had something to do with Senator Thurmond in some way, shape, or form. But a very interesting history. Worked for Senator Thurmond, Strom Thurmond, for years as his lawyer and his chief of staff, and moved on to become a congressman and then a federal judge. So got a lot of history in Washington, D.C. and South Carolina, knows everybody. And I enjoy spending time with you and talking to you. And, you know, we are, there's a truism that I think we're missing in politics today, but it goes something like this: if you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it.
I think you're exactly right. And by the way, it's just a pleasure to be with you all. Before we go any further, you mentioned Senator Gambrell from Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most distinguished South Carolinians we have ever had was Smythe Gambrell.
Yeah.
He founded an airline, I think it was Eastern
Right.
or Delta.
Right.
President of the American Bar Association. His son was United States Senator from Georgia. Jimmy Carter appointed him to succeed Senator Russell. He had 4 siblings in the late 50s. All 5 of those Gambrells were in Who's Who.
Right.
That is unheard of.
Yeah, and that carries on today in a lot of politics. You know, we don't. I don't know if we don't celebrate dynasties in the same way that the British do, but they certainly still exist here, especially I think in the South more so than anywhere else. But South Carolina has some political dynasty families for sure, and a lot of history with those dynasties, and we have some sitting right now in South Carolina Senate and South Carolina House of Representatives.
You're right.
Yeah, and Strom Thurmond certainly one of them, right? You worked for, how long did you work for Strom?
Well, going back to the senator, his father was U.S. attorney.
Right.
And very prominent lawyer, and of course, then he was very prominent, and he has 2 sons, one solicitor and one senator. And,
Right.
very interesting. I worked for him. I went as an intern in 1969, and we just formed a relationship, and he told me whenever I finished law school to make an application, and he would consider me coming back. And so when I finished law school, I did apply and ended up working for him from 19.
They all have a funny story about the senator. I mean, inevitably, they all have a funny story about the senator, and I've heard so many of those over the years. But if you don't know much about Senator Thurmond, you probably don't live in South Carolina, and we've got a lot of listeners that don't live in South Carolina. But Senator Thurmond, sort of known as a Renaissance man, and lived to be over 100, right?
Correct.
And continued to serve until he was 100 years old on the dot, right? We're pretty close to it. I can't remember.
He died 6 months after he decided not to run again, and after he left the Senate.
Succeeded by Lindsey Graham, Senator Graham.
Correct.
Who has been in office now, 18 years? Something like that. How long has it been? How long has Lindsey been in office?
It may be 20 years.
Might be 20. So, tell me a little bit about the senator before we move on to. What I'd like to eventually get into is something we were just talking about earlier, sort of the state of politics in the country and the state today. But I want to know a little bit about the senator first of all, because he's sort of a shroud of mystery and mystique in South Carolina. And so tell me something that people probably wouldn't know about the senator, if you don't mind.
Well, the first thing is, everybody knows this, he was an institution. He was not like just another senator. He was not like just another politician. He was an institution. I think the WIS-TV called him gave a title, the man of the century. And that's a century that included people like James F. Burns, people like Roger Milliken, people like Charlie Daniel. I mean, some of the great people of our state. He was a teacher. I would say if somebody asked me to say, how would you define Strom Thurmond? How would he want to be defined? I would say he would want to be defined as a teacher.
Really?
He was indeed a teacher.
Sure.
And I think superintendent of education in his county. But he was a teacher. First experience I really had with him when I first got to Washington, he said, come on and let's go to the committee. It was Armed Services Committee. I didn't have a portfolio for Armed Services matters, but he told me, come on, let's go. And so we went down the elevator and got into the bowels of the Capitol. And he looked at me and he said, which way do I go? Where is this hearing anyway? I said, well, Senator, it's in the Armed Services Committee. He said, where is that? Where we need to go? I said, well, Senator, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's over in the Russell Building. He said, where in the Russell Building? I said, well, I'm not exactly sure. He just stopped dead in his track and looked at me and he said, it's in room 314. Now let's go to room 314. Have you been here and scoped it out? I said, no, sir. He said, you ought to know where you're going when you're going somewhere. Don't ever go somewhere when you don't know where you're going. I said, yes, sir. So I followed him up to room 314. He finished his hearing. He told me, he said, just wait here. And I waited. We went back to his office, and on the way back, he said, now, anytime you're going to go somewhere with me, know where you're going. He was a teacher. He loved to teach.
Wow. One of my friends in Columbia told me one time, to sort of in that same train of thought. This is Rob Smith. I don't know if you remember Rob. He was a staffer over there for years. But Rob's first job with the senator's office was to basically walk around in the crowd with a notebook, not necessarily to tag along, but to walk around in a crowd with a notebook and take notes of everybody that the senator talked to, get their name, figure out who they were, take notes of everybody senator talked to, and then he was responsible for writing handwritten notes to everybody afterwards. Nice to meet you. It's good to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Signed, Senator Strom Thurmond. And then he moved up to the guy that whispered in his ear and said, there's John Napier coming. There's Stephen Goldfinch coming. There's Inglis Glover coming. So that the senator could say right off the bat, hello, Inglis, how's your dad? Hello, John, how's your mom? Just an incredible, like you said, is a machine.
Let me confirm that, if I may. My first job was to be counsel to the Administrative Practice and Procedure Subcommittee in the Senate. He was a ranking member, and Senator Kennedy was the chairman of that subcommittee, incidentally, which was the first Senate subcommittee to investigate Watergate. And I was taken down by his chief of staff at that time, Captain Dan Carrison, and introduced to the people on the subcommittee staff. And some very prominent people there. That was a subcommittee that Justice Breyer was the chief counsel to, not at that time, but right after Jim Flug. And after we had the introductions, Captain Carrison told me, he said, now you're going to be sitting in the senator's office, and you'll have these duties down in the subcommittee, of course, but you'll be sitting in the senator's office. So I did. And my job was, when he came back, he was running for re-election in 1972. When he came back, he would have a bunch of papers in his pocket, and he'd pull them out and hand them to me. And my job was to find out who Sally Smith was and all these little scraps of paper, what they meant. And to call Sally Smith and say, Miss Smith, Senator asked me to call you. You all were talking about an issue you had. He didn't have time to get all the information. Could you tell me what it was? And then write a letter to her and follow up. So that was part of his method of operation.
Fantastic constituent services. I mean,
probably the best you've ever had on the Hill.
I mean, it's hard to understand as somebody that doesn't do that on a daily basis. But if you don't have a mechanism for it, if you don't have an organization to it, you're just not going to do a very good job at it. And Senator Thurmond seemed to have sort of modeled that system of constituent services for generations of politicians to come.
He told me once, he said, our duty here is to serve. We're to help people. We're up here to help. I never want to see anybody on the staff ever ask, whether you're Democrat or Republican, what your race is, what your gender is. We're here to serve people.
Right. Yeah. And that's awesome. It seems like it's difficult to find nowadays in the same capacity, but something that we need, right?
Well, today I understand, just from some of the reading I've done recently, that most members of Congress and most senators spend something like 38% of their time raising money. 38% of their time raising money. That's obscene.
We've talked about this a little bit in the past, and one of the biggest impediments, and I don't know, I'll just call it turnoff. One of the biggest turnoffs to being a freshman congressman nowadays is the amount of money that you have to dedicate yourself to raising before you can ever get to the job of governing. And
well, that's the case also for senior members of committees.
It is.
They have to do it. There's an allocation that's required, unfortunately.
Well, every caucus requires money now. And if you don't know what a caucus is a group of people that come together, usually with a common goal to further that goal, okay? The Republicans have a caucus, the Democrats have a caucus, and there are a number of other caucuses as well. Just depends on what your goal is. But every caucus that you join requires a membership fee for the most part. How do you get that membership fee? You have to raise that money. Yeah, so sometimes, depending on how many caucuses you're in, you've got to raise $1 million before you can ever start the job. I mean, it is a full-time job to raise money in Congress anymore. And that.
Well, let's go to take it to a different step. Committee assignments are influenced by the amount of money you can raise.
Yeah.
I mean, it costs in terms of being able to raise and dedicate money to be on the Appropriations Committee or on the Ways and Means Committee or on the Agriculture Committee, on whatever. And it is it's quite a conundrum for our society today.
Yeah, there's a few things I believe that influence politics more than anything. Okay, I think, and you've got the benefit of history as a perspective that I do not have, but certainly money influences politics more than anything, and it seems like it influences more now than it used to. And the other thing I think that influences politics today more than it used to would be, what's the best way to put this? A desire to, well, let me just read this, and this because this really, I wanted to try to put it in my own words, but the way you presented me with an article a little while ago, and the way this article presents it is apropos. It's perfect for what we're talking about here. Let me read this if I can. This comes from, it's a center of left article, The Next Civil War by Stephen Marsh. And if I mispronounced his name, I apologize, but interesting perspective here, even though he's center of left, or liberal, if some of us would call him that. He's got an interesting perspective. I want you to hear this. The next civil war will be a war over meaning. The division begins in the information systems, the media, the machinery of electoral politics, the internet, and social networks. Every study of virility since the origin of social media has shown that after the experience of all, moral outrage is the strongest driver of traffic. I want to stop right there for just a second, because that's what I was trying to get at, is moral outrage. When I came into politics or public service a decade ago, and certainly social media had come a long ways, and was around by the time I got in, but it seems like it's doubled down in the last 10 years. And today the name of the game is to inspire moral outrage. It's not about compromise anymore. It's not about finding solutions. It's not about furthering policies. It's about inspiring moral outrage for the purpose of furthering your agenda or raising money. Primarily, it's about raising money than it is about anything else. And you can find these people that are purely hypocrites. It doesn't matter what the issue is. They don't care what the issue is. The issue for them is nothing more than raising this moral outrage for the purpose of raising money and their appeal. I think that feels like that's different today than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, before the invent of social media. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think it's been geometric. It has really gained steam since the internet has become so important in the way we transact business. One of my heroes is a fellow named Elliot Richardson. He's a very distinguished lawyer. He was ambassador to Great Britain, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Commerce, Undersecretary of State, Attorney General. Just had every title you could ever have. And I got to know him fairly well in Washington. We'd have lunch together a right good bit. Elliot wrote a book in 1997 or 98 called Reflections of a Radical Moderate. Listen to what he said in the context of what, Senator, you just said. He said, an elusive and impalpable lubricant of national business is comity. The word stands for the blend of understanding and respect, affection with which rivals in an established institutional setting conduct their business with one another. In Congress, this mutual regard is a regard for the public interest. Now, in context with what you just said, you have diametrical opposites.
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And how do you? It's too early to ask this question. We need to continue to explore this. But for rhetorical purposes, how do you get back to where you need to be when it feels like you are so far gone, both parties, doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you do, both parties are committed to raising more money than the other. And the way they raise more money than the other is by creating moral outrage, by making people mad. Right? That's the goal in, I don't want to give a percentage, but that's the goal for a large percentage of politicians today, is to create outrage, to tell everybody how nasty and negative and evil the other side is. And the purpose of that is for nothing other than to raise money. It doesn't further any legitimate goal other than to raise money.
You raise a great question. Maybe we can
it's not designed to be answered right now, but it's fascinating to me and fairly scary to me. I want to carry on with this thing for just a second if I can. When you combine the power of outrage with the low risk of judgment from behind a screen, computer screen,
Yep.
along with what psychologists call the reduction of empathetic distress, the basic inhumanity that the faceless of the internet permits, you have a very powerful machine for dehumanization, no matter what content goes into it. This phenomenon isn't limited to the United States. The same effect has been seen really all over the world. The internet, the computer, the screen has made this significantly worse. As you said, I mean, it's geometrics made it worse. And somebody asked me the other day. I get these calls all the time. The Democrats are running the country into the dirt, and there's no way we can survive another election of Democrats. And look, I'm a staunch Republican. Agree we need another Republican administration, another Republican Congress. But I always tell them the same thing. I say, you're missing the boat. It's not the Democrats alone that are going to kill this country, and it's not the Republicans alone either. Don't let me put you on the wrong road. What is going to kill this country is social media. What's going to kill society, figuratively kill society, is social media and the internet. I think we can survive another election of Democrats. If you're a Democrat, I'd say to you, you could survive another election of Republicans. I don't have any idea how society survives another 100 or 200 years of the dehumanization that comes from social media and the internet.
Yep.
I think the word dehumanization is so important here because that's what it does. The internet has allowed us to be faceless and say things that we wouldn't say face to face. It's allowed us to affect our own thinking. We don't have a reflexive thinking. We reflect. And often we respond before we have time to think about what we're saying. That's particularly true in business transactions, I think. We have an immediacy of a requirement to get an immediate answer on things. We don't have time to think about it overnight, to cogitate.
Yeah, the fact that you can doesn't always mean that you should. Right?
Absolutely.
And the internet and the computer screen has given you the ability to bypass that should question. I can. So, here I am. You don't get a fist in the face anymore when you say something nasty. You get no response other than the response that comes through the computer screen. There's no risk, really.
That's a great way to put it. There's no risk.
Yeah, very little risk.
When you're in a faceless situation.
Yeah, and that's dangerous. It's dangerous for civilization, really. And, but how do you escape it? It's so far gone. The internet is a thing. It's not going away. It's so far gone. Everybody relies on it. We order everything from toilet paper to food to home supplies, every single thing. You're not going to escape it, okay? So, the defeatist in me would say it's over. I mean, 200 years from now, society, civilization looks totally different than it did just 25 years ago. It looks totally different. I don't know how the democracy survives in the next 200 years.
I think you're aiming way out there. I'm going to say in 50 years.
I hope you're wrong.
Well,
I hope so too.
but you could very easily be right.
well, but we also have to realize that we have a self-correcting nature in this country, and we've always been rambunctious in our politics. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr,
They found out the hard way.
Yeah, they
they
did.
did it the hard way. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson did it the hard way and became friends in their last days. So while we've been rambunctious, we have never totally destroyed the core of what we're all about. And I've been reading at night, just since he died, I've been reading David McCullough's book called The American Spirit. And it's a listing or a number of lectures he's given at colleges and institutions around the country. And he addresses this in a certain way, and I want to quote what he said, because I think what we've lost is we've lost community. And if we can get some sense of community back, I think that's a way to counter this feeling we're talking about. He says, nor was there ever a self-made man or woman as much as we Americans love that expression. Everyone who's lived has been affected, changed, shaped, helped, or hindered by others. We all know in our own lives who those people are, who the people are who have opened a window, given us an idea, given us encouragement, given us some sense of direction, self-approval, self-worth, or who have straightened us out when we were on the wrong path. Most often, these have been our parents. Almost as often, they have been our teachers. I think what he's saying is we've got to have this sense of togetherness and know that we are all in the same boat. And we've all got to find a way to reach some sense of cooperation and comedy and collaboration and collegiality to make things work.
Now, some people will hear this and they'll think what is being preached here today is to be a moderation. And I say to you that is not correct, at least from my perspective. That is not correct. You can be as far left as you desire. You can be as far right as you desire, as long as you have mutual respect and an understanding that person's perspective is designed for the betterment of his state, local government, country, whatever.
It's an excellent point.
But the minute that the left starts throwing accusations at the right, we're trying to destroy the country. Same thing with the right. We're trying to destroy you. They are trying to destroy the country. This is for personal gain. They're doing this to get rich, whatever it might be. Even if it's true, even if it's, the one or two people that cause the entire apple orchard to go bad, for lack of a better term, even if it's true, that kind of language is designed, unintentionally designed, to take us down, to bring us down and really there's no benefit to it whatsoever.
Well, what it does is let me quote Elliot Richardson again.
Yeah.
It destroys that blend of understanding and respect, affection for which rivals must have for each other to make the system work.
I can give you the perfect example of this. Where rubber meets road here. We recently had, as you know, a very contentious abortion debate in Columbia. And if there's anything that can inspire passion, it's an abortion debate. There's very few things in Columbia that we do that I would call truly partisan. 95% of it is what I would call mostly nonpartisan stuff. There are some things here and there on the margins. Abortion is smack dab in the middle of what you would call the most partisan debate you can have. Okay, maybe partisan is not even the right word. Contentious, certainly. Okay, we had this very contentious abortion debate recently, and the debate was moving along nicely, as nicely as it could for an abortion debate. And eventually, when people started getting tired, and it started getting to be late at night, and we started having these little faction caucuses, okay, people splitting off into different rooms, negotiating different deals. Eventually, when people got tired, people started calling people names. People started saying, "You hate women." People started saying, "You want to control women." People started throwing these accusations, and you know what it did? It shut the debate down. Completely shut it down.
It causes you to get wider and wider apart.
And eventually, you can do this in the Senate. The only place you can do this in the Senate is in the Senate. You can't do it anywhere else. We just call a timeout. You just say, "Stop the clock." Okay? And we all sort of come back together and we talk about our differences, and everybody, you try to apologize, you try to get things back on track. You can't do that in almost any other deliberative body, but the Senate's a little different, as you know. And we eventually got it back on track, but we completely shut the whole process down. And it was just because people started calling each other names and started saying there were ulterior motives.
Let me shift that from Columbia up to Washington just a minute.
Sure.
One of the most instructive, and it was just not only instructive but wonderful assignments I ever had was in late 1977, 1978, to be chief counsel to the Senate committee that wrote its Code of Ethics and Code of Financial Disclosure. After Watergate, the Senate did not have a written Code of Ethics, nor did it have a written financial disclosure. And Senator Thurmond became the ranking member by seniority on the committee that was to draft the Code of Ethics and the Code of Financial Disclosure. And he designated me to be the chief counsel on that committee. Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, a very liberal member, was the Democratic chairman. We were dealing with one of the most contentious issues a legislator can have: his money or her money and how that is disclosed.
Self-governance. It's tough.
And it's tough.
Yeah.
And so my boss on this was Senator Thurmond. But the majority leader and the minority leader were very interested in these matters. The minority leader was Senator Howard Baker from Tennessee, one of the great people I have ever known. So he called me in And he said, I'm not going to try to micromanage this committee, obviously. He said, but I just want to lay some things out as we approach how we deal with this problem. I said, yes, sir. And he said, we're going to have people who have wild ideas. As we go through the hearings and the off-floor discussions, there are going to be wild ideas. He said, and there are going to be some we just can't accept. He said, but we have a duty to listen. He said, we have a duty to listen and then present, because we either hone our arguments and make our arguments better, or the important thing here is the other fellow just might be right.
Hard to admit, but true.
Hard pill to swallow there.
And that, to me, was a lesson in governance that I never forgot. The other person, if you don't listen, you don't know whether the other person's right or wrong. And the other person just might be right.
Yeah. It's such a simple thing, but at the end of the day, it's such a hard thing to actually put it into practice. And it requires someone with humility and understanding to put it into practice. Which is why elections matter so much. There's so many people that feel like they've been disenfranchised by the electoral system, and I tell you, every vote counts. And people look at me and say, "That's not true. That's crazy." It's true. Every vote does count, and I could get it. I could write a dissertation on why, but at the end of the day, elections matter, from the city council member all the way up to your U.S. Senator and President of the United States. Elections matter, because even if you're talking about the simplest of matter, and I'll give you another example. We have had some trouble with some workers around we're remodeling, redecorating. Had some trouble with a worker that was not being truthful to us over very minor things that didn't cost a lot of money. But I told my wife the other day, I said, if that person will lie to us over something like that, he'll lie to us. He or she will lie to us over something that's much bigger. The simplest minor things, local government, those elections matter. They matter. And really we need to get back there where people understand that elections matter, and the people that they put into office have to reflect those values.
Well, and I would like to take it to another step, and that is the sense of community matters. And in the transience and the mobility of where we are today, and the internet, and the money, those are three big problems we've got to confront. But we've got to begin that confrontation at the community level. And the community is the building block for everything we have in this country. And that's why I don't lose hope. If we can just get the community spirit back, then I think we have some real hope to turn things.
So do you take the perspective that this is just a messy process? It's always been a messy process. These things come in cycles, and at the end of the day, the cycle is going to reveal itself as a very messy, ugly cycle, but it's going to repair itself. Our democracy, for lack of a better word, our civilization is going to repair itself.
Well, it either is or it isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we are right now, I think. But we have been self-correcting in the past.
Yeah.
We have been rambunctious in the past. We have taken things to the cliff in the past. And we're on the cliff now. And I think
We are on the cliff.
Yeah, it really, really we are. And it's now time to either fish or cut bait.
Yeah.
And trying to.
I hope we fish.
I do too.
So what? I'm not asking you to be a prophet, but I mean, what happens? Where does this go from here? You, like I said earlier, you've got the perspective of history and politics that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, you do.
That's all I've got age on everybody.
Well, you went through Watergate, and that was a fairly tumultuous time in American history. And I can imagine back then everybody thought this is something totally new and different. We're at the edge of, political civilization as we know it. We're right back there again. But what do we do? Where do we go from here?
Well, we live in a very strange and volatile world. And last night I just read a piece that Peggy Noonan wrote in the Wall Street Journal about what's going on in Russia. And the fact that we've got a tiger that may be backed into a corner. And we have to worry about that. There is nothing in any writing in the Bible or anywhere that I've ever seen it that says the United States of America is perpetually our end all and be all.
Sure.
We've got China, we've got Brazil, we've got India, we've got Russia, we've got a very volatile world, and so we've got to get our thinking straight here in the United States to be able to compete. And one misstep, and China's on our door. Not necessarily militarily, but technologically or in other ways. And so we live in a very competitive world. Competitive in education, competitive in technology. And so we've got to, it goes back to teaching and learning at the community level, in my judgment.
And that certainly seems like that's what Strom Thurmond was great at, right? He was great. He was great. He was. I mean, I know we're coming full circle here, but he seemed to me to be great at teaching at the community level, connecting with people at the community level. A lot of that seems to be lost in today's politics, in today's world of money and hate mongering in politics. And you had mentioned to me one time about the interesting history, the interplay between Senator Fritz Hollings, and Senator Strom Thurmond, and how publicly they never really exchanged words, but privately they ran this state together as an institution.
I think that's correct.
That wouldn't surprise me.
No, I
think that's correct.
And how do we?
Because they had community of interest, and
right,
there were some people who they had people who were close to both of them, who were back channel experts who knew how to put the interest of our state to both of them, and they knew how to accept that.
And I think I know who two of those people were. You might be one of those. And our friend here in Merle's, should I call his name? Is it okay to call his name?
Sure.
Bubba Ming. It was Senator Hollings' chief of staff for how many years?
20 or 30, 20.
And he lives right here in Merle's Inlet. So we have, two of those people that were the back channelers to run a lot right here.
They were information sources, a better way to put it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. But that's what's needed. you have to have those people that are willing to go and cross the line and figure out how to find comedy and compromise and solutions. That doesn't mean that you have to give up your principles. That doesn't mean that you have to be the dirty word, a moderate. Nowadays, moderate, such a dirty, I mean, the left hate that word. The right hates that word.
I like a radical moderate.
Radical moderate is an interesting way to put it. But nobody's saying you have to be the radical moderate, the dirty moderate. You just have to have respect for the other side. It's just that simple. You have to have respect for the other side. And the minute that they become anything other than public servants trying to serve their constituency, you've lost that. You've lost it, and you're moving in the wrong direction.
I've heard so many people say how they appreciate the fact, and this is going back before Stephen and I became business partners, they appreciated the fact that Stephen was within reach for them. They were able to reach out to him, albeit through his secretary or whatever, and got contact with him on issues here. I don't know how many other people do that, I'm sure, but I know that's really important. And I know for us with resources here, when it comes to DNR, anybody ever has an issue, obviously they all want to talk to Stephen because he listens.
Mm-hmm. Listening. Yeah. Senator Baker said it when he gave me instructions on writing that code and financial disclosure. You have to listen. You have a duty to listen.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. And I have never known the Senator Goldfinch, not to listen. He and I disagree on some things. And he'll tell me right up front, I can't do that, or I've got other considerations here. But the fact that he listens is something that is very important to me as one of his constituents.
And I think going right to social media, that's another, I mean, talk about Facebook. I know certain people that Stephen knows as well that are a associate of mine, and me nor him listen to each other, but we battle out on social media. And it's, we don't really battle. I don't want to say that, but it just gets ugly on there.
Sure.
And it's,
you get in jail.
It's still, I've been to jail twice this year, right? I went to jail twice.
Facebook jail for clarity.
Jail for clarity.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I have taken the time to listen to this individual. I have. I actually had to take a road trip with him, and we rode together. And we have taken the time, and I listened to him. But I know he does not listen to me. And I actually agree with a lot of his opinions and a lot of his views, but he does not listen to me, and he does not agree with any of my views unless it concerns the resources. But that he doesn't. Anything else, my thoughts don't matter.
Yeah, and you know that, right?
And I know it. And it's like I told Stephen last year when I think it was the medical marijuana came up.
Yeah.
And he was amped up about it. Of course, that became controversial. So I went and found the local network where I could watch these guys, the Senate. And I sat there and watched it. And we did a podcast, like one of our first couple podcasts. And I was like, y'all don't actually fight in there. Like, I really, when you watch the mainstream media, your thought of Senate or, the House is, hollering and screaming at each other and blah, blah, blah. And other than a couple guys getting up and trying to filibuster, I think, on a couple different things, everybody seemed to be working together. But I'm a constituent here. I'm just saying what I saw. What I saw looked like a room full of people working together.
Yeah. You're just as a constituent, but you are as important as anybody who is in office.
Yeah.
And that's what is so missing today. The constituent has just as much right as the office holder. The office holder is merely a placeholder.
Right.
You know what you told me one time? I've in almost.
Don't tell them everything we've talked
about. No, I won't.
Please.
I won't. It's not confidential. In 10 years, I bet I have told this a dozen times. And I've even mentioned it on the Senate floor before. But you told me one time something that has stayed with me for a long time. You said, Stephen, you are the perfect reflection of your constituency. And that doesn't mean you're perfect by any means. I'm not perfect. But you're the perfect reflection of your constituency. And when you're no longer the perfect reflection of your constituency, it's time for them to send you home. It's incumbent upon them to send you home. And the reason that came up, I can't remember what debate it was. Maybe it was Confederate flag or something that was a very difficult decision was coming up, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And I was like looking at polling, and I was looking at I was asking polling on social media, and I was doing official polling. And that was your answer to me. It doesn't matter. You don't go chasing polling. Don't go chasing polling. What you need to do is act on what's right, what you think's right. And at the end of the day, if that's not what your values don't reflect what your constituency's values are, then it's time for them to send you home. And that really has given me incredible freedom to sort of do what I think is right and not to chase polling. If you look around the Senate floor or the House floor on any given debate, especially the contentious ones, you'll see people that have hired consultants, and they'll be doing polling left and right and spending money left and right to try to figure out. But what you told me that day has really given me a lot of freedom to be able to just do what I think's right. I have the information. That's what a representative government is all about. I have information that other people don't have. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do what I think is right, and when it's no longer what my constituency wants, it's incumbent upon them to send me home. That creates incredible freedom for a public servant. And anyway, you gave me that freedom, so thank you.
Well, thank you. When I was in public elective office, the most important, the overarching issue was tobacco.
Yeah.
The tobacco program was probably the most important economic indicator for eastern South Carolina and eastern North Carolina and up into Kentucky and Tennessee and Georgia too. But one day, one of the veteran reporters for the News and Courier, the predecessor to the Posting Courier, came into my office, and he asked me, he said, "Do you smoke?" I said, "Well, I do not. I had smoked." And I said, "I do not." He said, "How can you represent this district?" And that really hit me hard.
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I can represent this district because I believe in tobacco as the economic mainstream of this district, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect it." And in fact, when I had the first campaign, I was talking about some issues. Food stamps was one that I was talking about, and the incumbent looked at me and laughed and said, "You got to change your tune on that." He said, "You're going to have build coalitions when you get up there if you're going to protect your tobacco program." And I found out that I did. And I had to moderate my views on reform for the food stamp program in order to reach other members who, particularly in the urban areas, other members who would be supportive of our rural interest. Charlie Rose was one of my closest friends. He was a congressman from Fayetteville, Wilmington, the tobacco interest there. And he came to me as we were beginning the reauthorization of the tobacco program and said, "Buddy, I want to get to know you a little bit." I said, "Mr. Chairman, I want to get to know you too." We had been to the same college, but we really didn't know each other that well. We knew each other. We had mutual friends. And he said, can I come up to your office and let's talk? I said, no, sir, I'm going to come to your office. And he said, oh, no. Let's just talk on the floor. Well, I mean, that battering back and forth, or that trying to get to know one another back and forth, though he was in a much elevated position to me in terms of the structure of the House of Representatives, and he was in a different party, was something that eased the tensions or eased us into a better relationship. And when we began the conversation, he said, I'm not trying to get you to vote any particular way. That's your decision, he said. But I represent growers and the other people who represent company interest and the other people who represent other interests. And he said, I think our interests converge. He said, I need me a Republican. I said, Mr. Chairman, you got you a Republican, what you need. And we started working on a program that would be self-sufficient for the stabilization of the tobacco interest. That required some votes from people who were in the milk industry in Minnesota and Indiana and Wisconsin and Vermont, who were Republicans. And it required some of the city interest who were Democrats who were involved in the food stamp program. And so the first vote that we had in the committee, this was a separate matter, was on reform of the food stamp program. It was very important to the Secretary of Agriculture, and he was sitting right before me. And question was what commodities you could buy your food stamps with using the vouchers. And I voted against a change in the program because I had 3 committee members who were from New York City who were looking at me pretty hardly to see how I was going to vote because they were going to reciprocate in their votes. Now, there was no trade back and forth, but you can look a man's eye and tell how he's thinking.
Sure.
And so, in effect, we had to build those coalitions with sugar, milk, and the other commodities in order to protect tobacco. Mm-hmm. That friendship with Charlie Rose developed, it grew, and after he left the Congress and I was in the government relations business, we represented a number of clients together. He referring things to me referring things to him, and us jointly working with each other. And in the last year of his life, we talked every day on the telephone. That's how we get back together.
Yeah,
Senator.
Mutual respect.
Mutual respect. We did not have what you would call mutual interest except one thing, and that was tobacco. It was very important to him because his farmers couldn't get loans for the next year unless they had the stabilization price to go to the bank and show the bank that they had a guaranteed loan.
Right.
I had the same interest in northeastern South Carolina, Horry County, Marion County. Georgetown had those interests too. We found a common ground. And that's what we've got to do, is find a common ground.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's exactly right.
Very important.
I'd love to do this some more at some point.
Absolutely.
Don't wait too long.
You've got some great stories. I want to at some point in time talk about Watergate and I want to talk about your phones getting tapped. And I want to get it, not today.
No.
I want to tease that for an episode 2 at some point in time, because we talked about what we needed to talk about today, which was philosophy, a little bit of philosophy, and the political future of the nation. And I wanted to get that out of the way because I think that's extremely important, and I wanted your perspective on that. But I want to hear some stories too.
Well, thank you for saying that. But you know, part of the stories I have are not my stories. They're stories because of people I've been around and been able to observe. Yourself, some people not known to the people of your viewing audience.
Sure.
I mean, I was not what I would call a horizontal friend of Senator Howard Baker. I was a vertical friend in that I learned from him. Mm-hmm. But the Lord's been pretty good to me in giving me opportunities to observe people. And I've just been a footnote, but there have been some right interesting philosophies that people have shared with me that I'm very grateful for.
Well, it seems like you've been an important part of the entire process, not just in South Carolina, but everywhere.
No, so I've been just a little footnote.
No,
I don't know.
We think more of you than that.
I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great. I'm looking forward to doing it again.
We look forward to it. Thank you so much.
It was very nice. Thank you for taking the time. And I tell you what, next week who knows what we're going to be talking about. The senator here will be packing up here in a couple weeks.
Where are you going, Senator?
I'm going to Colorado on my annual elk pilgrimage. I go out there every year, either with a bow or a rifle. This year, Inglis is going to impale himself.
He's bringing back another one to make me have to dodge in here.
Yeah. This year, I drew a first season rifle tag, so I'll be in Colorado October 14th through the 20th, and then I come home for a week, and then I'm back November 1st through the 5th for second season mule deer. And I'm looking forward to it. As anybody that has been on a trip in the fall, you know what I'm talking about, but I check the weather about 6 times a day. And I'm just looking for that. I mean, right now, where I hunt in Colorado, it's 64 degrees.
Oh, okay. But you want it to make a drop, right?
No, I just want it to be fall.
Oh, okay.
And today we had a beautiful day today. I mean, it was fall weather today, but I get fall fever this time of year. I just start itching for that cooler weather, the drier weather, the less humidity, and I'm looking forward to being in the mountains for.
I'm gonna ask you a dumb question.
Days.
So, are you gonna shoot said elk with a rifle, or are you gonna use a bow?
No, I drew a rifle tag this year.
Okay, so you have to shoot it with a rifle.
You say you drew a rifle tag.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do one or the other.
You do on public land in Colorado. There's a tag system, like a lottery system.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and you put into this lottery system, and you build up points. And the more points you have, the more likely there is a chance of you being drawn. So I've been, doing this system for 20-something years now, and I've sort of figured out how to get a tag every year, whether it be a bow tag or a rifle tag.
Wait a minute. Now, you're not telling us you figured out how to beat the system.
No. It's not beating the system. It's playing the system.
Playing the system.
Right.
We've already had this discussion.
Just want to be sure.
No. There's
Playing
no
the
beating it.
system.
There's no beating it. But yeah, I can get a tag every year with either a rifle or a bow, and I love elk. I love elk hunting.
Well, let me back up just a second. Yeah. We send you to Columbia to beat the system.
That's right.
We don't send you up there to play the system.
That's right.
It's such you bring up an interesting point, and I don't want to get sidetracked too far, but you bring up an interesting point. Your generation of folks expect something different from my generation of folks. Your generation of folks expect politicians, public servants, to bring home the bacon.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that's the best way I know how to put it. You bring home the bacon. You build influence, you build seniority, and you bring home the bacon. My generation of people expect and I don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush, but my generation of people expect the exact opposite. They want me to leave the bacon in Columbia. And I think to myself, and it could be a function, it literally could be a function of where we live. We live in a little microcosm here. Well, we live in a little different place. Let's just put it that way. Exactly. We live in a different place than the rest of the state. Here let's call it the PD area, Georgetown, is sort of splits the difference. But Horry, Georgetown area, I feel like we've been on an island, since the Revolutionary War, literally and figuratively. In people's minds and literally, we are on an island. The rivers divide us from the rest of the state. Mm-hmm. And that river system that divides us from the rest of the state has sort of left us behind over the course of the last 200 or 300 years. And I want to have a conversation about this sometime.
I'll tell you one thing. English will know this, being from Chiraw area, and I was from Bennettsville area in Lake City. Yep. We always heard, all the boys, my friends told me, once you cross that waterway, there's a different way of doing things.
It's a different life.
That's right.
And it's been like that since the beginning of the nation. And I think that has created a mentality. Well, you've heard it said before, the Independent Republic of Horry.
Oh, yeah.
It's created a mentality that, we're going to do it ourselves.
They still want the bacon.
They want
to add some flavor.
Well, it gives everybody a little chip on their shoulder, though, that's from here, that we haven't gotten our fair share from Columbia or Washington, D.C.
I think that's true.
And I think that's exactly true. And but this new generation that has social media doesn't seem to have that same chip on their shoulder.
Because you don't know where people are.
Yeah.
That's right. You don't.
It's a different mentality, and I know exactly who I'm talking. Within a minute on the phone, I know exactly who I'm talking to, and it's just
Can you identify whether they're from New Jersey or whether they're from Indiana or whether they're from Ohio?
That one's pretty easy. That one's just an accent. But I mean, with the topic of conversation, the tenor of the conversation, I can tell you they're a bring home the bacon Republican or they're a leave the bacon at the Capitol Republican. And that's an interesting thing to talk about at some point.
It really depends on what type of bacon you're talking about.
Yeah, it does. It does. If let me go ahead and stake out my claim on this one. If the bacon is going to go somewhere else, it might as well come to my
here.
district.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just identified the kind of Republican. If it's going to go somewhere else and be used for some green bean museum, it better come back to my district instead.
Amen, brother.
I'm all for you.
Yeah.
Amen, brother. Well, I'll tell you what, I can't think of a better statement to end on than Mr. Napier, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to meet you, a pleasure and listening, and definitely want to get you back. But you know what? Next week, again, we're going to be talking fishing. We're going to be talking hunting. We're going to be talking politics. Who knows what we're going to talk about? But I can tell you, it's always going to have to deal with fins, fur, and feathers here on Trilogy Outdoors. Make sure you click subscribe, like, whatever you want to. You can also catch us Saturday mornings on the iHeartMedia app at Southern English Radio Show right there from 8 till 10, or pick up our magazine, Trilogy Outdoors Magazine. But until next week, hey, remember, fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here with us on Trilogy Outdoors.
Trilogy Outdoors Podcast is a product of Trilogy Outdoors Media. All views and opinions of our hosts and guests are not necessarily those of our sponsors. Trilogy Outdoors is produced and edited by Trilogy Outdoors Media. Be sure to follow us on all the podcast platforms as well as our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also, don't forget our other brands, Southern English Radio Show and Walk 'Em All Outdoor Magazine. To find more information, visit TrilogyOutdoorsMedia.com. And remember, if it's anything dealing with fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here on Trilogy Outdoors.